If you notice in the Gita, Krishna keeps saying over and over again, look, whichever you pray to, you're going to get. Okay? If you pray to the lesser god, say you pray to the god of drink, you'll become a drunk. If you pray to the goddess of wealth, you'll probably become rich sooner or later in one incarnation or another. If you pray to the void, you will become void. I mean, it's an interesting question in Hinduism. I won't get into debating it on the level of Buddhism, but in Hinduism, there are some beings who go into what's called nirvikalpa samadhi, samadhi without form. And after, Maharaji said 43 days, but I've also heard of 21 days, I'm not quite sure about it. After so many days of being merged into that, the body disintegrates, and it just falls apart because there's nobody in there keeping it together. There are other beings who write back because they still have more karma to do. Their attachments bring them right back. And they've just touched the possibility of it. I think many people in this room have done that. There are others who go into it, reside in it, and yet the manifestation continues, but it is the manifestation of the Brahman coming through a form. It's like nobody came back, but yet there is something there. What that space is, and how that is manifest, what those beings look like, for example, are beings of crazy wisdom. That's what one would look like. There are no more rules in the game for such a being, because the compassion is all-embracing. The compassion comes out of total consciousness. And so that any of our models of you shouldn't do that because that's bad come out of our limited perspective. And when you're in the presence of one of these beings, when you sense the presence of such a being, you tend to more adopt the role of openness to the possibility rather than to judgment. Trungpa talks about crazy wisdom as outrageous wisdom devoid of self and the common sense of literal thinking. Certainly sounds like the Brahman thus far. Crazy wisdom is wild. In fact, it is the first attempt to express the dynamics of the final spiritual stage of a bodhisattva. To step out with nakedness of mind, unconditioned beyond conceptualization. In this state, one acts purely on what is, with the qualities of earth, water, fire, space, and stormy air. In Hakuin's Zen poem, beautiful Zen poem, we used to recite every morning at 4 in the Zen temple in Kyoto. Part of it says, if we turn inward and prove our true nature, capital T, capital N, that true self is no self, meaning there's no finite thing, our own self is no self, we go beyond ego and past clever words. Then the gate to the oneness of cause and effect is thrown open. Not 2 and not 3, straight ahead runs the way. Now our form is no form, so in coming and going we never leave home. Now our thought is no thought, so our dancing and songs are the voice of the Dharma. So our dancing and songs are the voice of the Dharma. So our dancing and songs are the voice of Krishna. So our dancing and song, which comes out of our perception, which resides in the place beyond perception, is that of a true harmonizing with the divine law that incorporates form and formlessness, that incorporates all conceptual possibilities. So now we have a whole new meaning of karma yoga, because before, karma yoga was doing something from within your karmic predicament to bring you to the one. Once you reside in the one, you come into a relationship with law such that all actions henceforth are themselves the pure statement of Dharma, because you have transcended guna. You are near guna. You are beyond the attachment to the strands of nature that bind. So that a being who is residing in the Brahman and who may be doing something every day is qualitatively an entirely different entity than everybody else who you are seeing, because there is nobody there. And that is one of the awesome and exasperating qualities of being around beings who you have the grace to come in contact with, who, as far as you can see, like with my guru in 1967 November, until this point, thought about him, studied him, reflected him, analyzed him. I can't find anybody there. I keep projecting into him there'll be another person, because there's a flesh and blood body there. And as it walks and it talks and it smiles and it laughs and it does all this stuff. But when I look into those eyes, or I reside in that heart, or I quiet down and meditate on the form, or I go towards that guru, it's like I am going into vast emptiness.
Sounds True presents Love, Service, Devotion, and the Ultimate Surrender. Ram Dass on the Bhagavad Gita, Session 5, Sacrifice and Mantra.
The mystical literature, if you explore it open-mindedly, it would seem to have two categories of experience, in one of which the escape from the phenomenal world and all that conditions it is the dominant feature, which in Buddhism is known as nibbana. And the other equally frequent type of mystical experience that is reported in the literature concerns love as a central phenomenon. Now, we can get into the exquisitries of dialogue of which is higher, but from our point of view, it isn't a terribly productive debate. I think it's quite simple that whichever type you're going to fall into, you'll know when you get there, or get here. And until then, you can pretty much just allow for it all, instead of saying, well, logically, that couldn't possibly be, because it isn't a game of logic. And whether we get into the issue of one mind, or when you get into Brahman, then at the point of merging into the Brahman, you perceive the Purushatma, you perceive that divine consciousness which lies behind formlessness and form, or whether all of that is just another illusion within the realm of form, is an issue we don't have to decide about. We merely have to honor all these possibilities. And in the Bhagavad Gita, the structure of Krishna's presentation to Arjuna, in which he is showing him how it is he's saying, once you have transcended your desires and your attachments, and you are residing in the Brahman, when you have transcended your ego, so you aren't anymore, at that point you will know me. And there is some quality about that which feels harmonious with my being. Not that there is Sam Krishna out there, but merely if I am trying to understand what the model of Bodhisattva is, what the model of becoming the Dharma is about, why it is that the emptier I get, the more filled I am with love. If I try to put all that together, out comes a feeling that formless and form are still within the realm of polarity, even though the formless includes all the form, and emptiness is but another form, so that emptiness is included in form. Now, you can treat these as the jhanas, or you can actually go into the plane of Brahman, or nibbana and still consider the possibility. The interesting question I was talking with Joseph the other day about, and Jack, was what was the Buddha doing for the last 40 years after he got enlightened? Where was the motivation for those acts? Obviously, it wasn't negative stuff he was still working out. But from then on, he became the statement of the Dharma. And to me, that is merging with the divine law. And now I'd like to read to you another one of the sections from the Tao Te Ching, which seems to touch this place very beautifully. Touch ultimate emptiness. Hold steady and still. All things work together. I have watched them reverting and have seen how they flourish and return again, each to his roots. This, I say, is the stillness, a retreat to one's roots. Or better yet, return to the will of God, which is, I say, to constancy. The knowledge of constancy I call enlightenment, and say that not to know it is blindness that works evil. But when you know what eternally is so, you have stature. And stature means righteousness. And righteousness is kingly, and kingliness is divine. Then, though you die, you shall not perish. And this Sufi quote, Monuddin Chisti, for how much longer, so I ask my Lord, my lover and beloved, my heart's own God, how much longer wilt thou keep thy face close hid behind the screen? Sure it is time that thou unveil thyself to thy slave's eyes. He said, I ever am without a screen. Seest thou a screen? Then that screen is thyself, thy separative and egoistic self. Whilst thou art fixed in sense of separateness, countless as living bodies are the veils thou flingest over me, keeping me unseen. Thy separatist small self itself is a screen. My self is by the selfless ever seen. My self is by the selfless ever seen. Into the Brahman and then. My self is by the selfless, he that resides in the Atman, the Brahman. Now, keeping in mind all of that, let's turn to a topic that is very much emphasized in the Gita, and you'll see how relevant it is to our predicament, and that is the term sacrifice, which is a very kind of alien term in our culture. I've always had a very hard time with it, about sacrifice. In our considerations of karma yoga, that is the stuff that is done every day by each of us, and the idea of making it karma yoga, meaning making it a form of yoga, making everything you do all day a form of awakening. We talked about it being your karma, and studying your karma and beginning to reflect on the way in which nature works through you, and just seeing the natural process of your unfolding and your individual differences. Doing your duty, if you will, as Krishna advised Arjuna. Doing your dharma in the little d sense. Then we've been exploring how as the higher wisdom develops, the wisdom of the Gyan, the wisdom about Brahman, the wisdom of who you are, the wisdom of the Atman, the wisdom of the Buddhi, the wisdom that you weren't who you thought you were, then that wisdom starts to solidify the approach to actions as karma yoga, because of understanding that behind this form there is something entirely different, and that this is merely passing show. And so at this point, with those bits of information, you could be doing karma yoga with a degree of sameness and indifference, realizing sameness, that is, it all is out of the Brahman, same, it's all the same, everything is the same as everything else. And indifference, it's all going to pass away. It's all transient, it's all temporary, anicca in Southern Buddhism. But now we approach the concept of sacrifice as a way of understanding daily action. Let me read the excerpts from the Gita about sacrifice. The first ones you'll see are almost dealing with sacrifice the way most people think about sacrifice, in very ritualistic terms. The world is in the bonds of action unless the action is consecrated, that means offered. Let thy actions then be pure, free from the bonds of desire. That's the beginning lead way Krishna introduces sacrifice. Thus spoke the Lord of creation when he made both man and sacrifice. By sacrifice thou shalt multiply and obtain all thy desires. By sacrifice. By sacrifice shalt thou honor the gods, and the gods will then love thee. And thus in harmony with them shalt thou attain the supreme good. For pleased with thy sacrifice, the gods will grant to thee the joy of all thy desires. Only a thief would enjoy the gift and not offer them in sacrifice. Holy men who take as food the remains of sacrifice become free from all thy sins, but the unholy who eat food that is in truth sin. Food is the life of all beings, and all food comes from the rain above. Sacrifice brings the rain, and sacrifice is sacred action. Sacred action is described in the Vedas, and these come from the eternal, and therefore is the eternal ever present in a sacrifice. Now, a lot of the concepts there are going to come up in a moment, but the one that I might just deal with directly is, by sacrifice shalt thou honor the gods, and the gods will then love thee. Just as with visualization exercises, on the astral planes there are beings who represent all the different facets of existence. And by taking each aspect of your life and offering it to that particular astral aspect, you form an alliance, if you will, with across planes of consciousness. And so it isn't so much that the gods are sitting up there angry or happy. It is the beginning of an understanding, and this is a very, very beautiful point, an understanding of the interrelatedness of the universe, both in a worldly sense and a spiritual sense. See, the first thing when we studied karma and reincarnation, we got a sense of the interrelatedness of things in a worldly sense, that all is interrelated with everything else lawfully. Now we explored that when we transcend our attachment to the gunas, to the ropes that bind us in the physical world, we enter into the Brahman, to an entire spiritual domain which incorporates all of this. Now we are starting to explore what is our relationship to the spiritual aspect of all of this. What is the interrelationship across these things? And the act of sacrifice is the beginning of the recognition of the fact that who you are is both a worldly entity on the physical, astral, and causal plane, and also living spirit. It's starting to give credence to the living spirit. It's starting to give credence to the Brahman in your daily life. Who in all his works sees God, he in truth goes unto God. God is his worship, God is his offering, and offered by God in the fire of God. These are more of the Bhagavad Gita quotes. There are yogis whose sacrifice is an offering to the gods, but others offer as a sacrifice their own soul in the fire of God. Often what we've thought about as sacrifice is you sacrifice a slaughtered lamb. You slaughter a lamb in sacrifice. Or you throw ghee into the fire as a sacrifice. But now we're exploring the possibility that the sacrifice is oneself. In the fire of an inner harmony, some surrender their senses in darkness. And in the fire of the senses, some surrender their outer light. That means some yogis go into dark rooms and they just cut out the light. And some extract their awareness from their eyes so that though there's light out there, they're not seeing it because they have surrendered seeing. Others have surrendered the light. Others sacrifice their breath of life and also the powers of life in the fire of an inner union lighted by the flash of vision. These are all describing yogic techniques. And others, faithful to austere vows, offer their wealth as a sacrifice, or their penance, or their practice of yoga, or their sacred studies, or their knowledge. Some offer their outflowing breath into the breath that flows in, and the inflowing breath into the breath that flows out. They aim at pranayama, breath harmony, and the flow of their breath is in peace. Others, through practice of abstinence, offer their life into life. All those who know what is sacrifice, and through sacrifice purify their sins. That is when we said, if you're going to give up desires, what desire do you use to give up desires? And now here comes the answer, the desire of offering it all in sacrifice, which is a return to the roots. It is your life through offering all your acts into that transmutation of being. I can't sense how subtle that transformation was or is in me, as slowly, nothing seems to mean anything but doing it all in order to merely honor the Dharma, and that nothing else in life seems to have much pull anymore. The doing it for me isn't the same as the surrendering it outward, upward, inward. It's like when Maharaji named me Ramdas. Ramdas means servant of God, meaning your life is a service to God. And he names me Ramdas, and I go around saying, I'm Ramdas, and everybody calls me Ramdas. And everybody says, do you have to have an Indian name? What do you need a weird name like that for? Can't you just be Dick Alpert? Sure. But it's very functional because it's reminding me. It keeps reminding me. Ramdas keeps reminding me. Servant of God. Somebody says Ramdas, and I hear servant of God. And that reminds me about what the trip is. It reminds me about this kind of sacrifice, this process. And often Maharaji would say something to Ramdas, and I would be busy being Dick Alpert. And I would feel like he was talking to somebody over my shoulder. Like, he's talking to who I will be when I cease to be who I think I am. Okay? And you begin to conceive of the being you will be when all of your acts are designed to transform your being into a divine entity. Entity in quotes for the Buddhists. Thus, in many ways men sacrifice, and in many ways they go to Brahman. Know that all sacrifice is holy work, and knowing this thou shalt be free. But greater than any earthly sacrifice is the sacrifice of sacred wisdom, for wisdom is in truth the end of all holy work. You learn it all until you realize you know nothing. You offer even your understanding, and that is the tricky predicament of Gyan yogis. See, every yoga has a trap in it, as we've been talking about it. Every single one. There's no yoga that is free of ways of sucking you in so you get lost in it. You get lost in the method for lifetimes. I mean, bhakti, you can just get so hooked on bliss, right? And in Gyan Yoga, you can get so hooked on knowing you know. And it gets so subtle because you know so much. You you get to get very quiet inside, and you're knowing more and more the quieter you get. But there's still a knower and that which is known. And you get right up to the door, but you knock, but you can't get through, because as long as you need to know, you know. Sorry, says St. Peter. Because only when the knower and the known become one does that get through the door. Nobody who knows anything gets through the door. So the ultimate sacrifice for the Jnani is knowing anything. And it used to be, like when I was the professor, that when somebody would ask me a question, it would be totally inconceivable that I could answer, I don't know. You just didn't do that. You always had an opinion about it, at least. And now it's become a big status thing. It's a new ego trip. I don't know. I even usually say, not only don't I know, I don't even care. So in case anybody's listening, they'll know that I'm not collecting, right? But that's not going to work either, of course. To finish off these quotes from the Gita in which Krishna is instructing Arjuna about sacrifice. Offer all thy works to God. Throw off selfish bonds and do thy work. No sin can then stain thee, even as waters do not stain the leaf of the lotus. Others worship me and work for me with the sacrifice of spiritual vision. They worship me as one and as many because they see that all is in me. For I am the sacrifice and the offering, the sacred gift and the sacred plant. I am the holy words, the holy food, the holy fire, and the offering that is made into the fire. He who offers me with devotion only a leaf, or a flower, or a fruit, or even a little water, this I accept from that yearning soul, because with a pure heart it was offered with love. Whatever you do, or eat, or give, or offer in adoration, let it be an offering to me, and whatever you suffer, suffer it for me. Thus you shall be free from the bonds of karma, which yield fruits that are evil and good. And with thy soul one in renunciation, thou shalt be free to come to me. Give me thy mind. Give me thy heart. Give me thy offerings. Give me thy adoration. And thus with thy soul in harmony and making me thy goal supreme, thou shalt in truth come to me. In the Vedas, there are descriptions of the route from the one into the many. That is the manifestation of Prakriti, or form. And it's seen as an act of sacrifice. And then it is seen that man's act of sacrifice, a man or a woman's act of sacrifice back into the one, completes the wheel. It spiritizes the life. It brings the whole thing into harmony. It makes meaningful an otherwise desperately meaningless existence. It makes us realize that we are part of a process. We are part of the Dharma. We are part of a divine play. And we get by our pomposity of thinking of our personal special gratification, and we see ourselves as part of Christ's body, as I talked about from Paul's letter to the Romans. And you begin to experience the entire universe as linked in one stupendous sacrifice, each offering to the other part. And those of you that have been in human relationships where love has really been an element of the relationship. You have recognized the experience where the well-being of your beloved is more important than your own well-being. And you offer your own discomfort into the well-being of your beloved. And if you can project now from that experience, which everybody in this room has had, into a time which is called the Sat Yuga, when everybody is operating that way in relation to everything, you can conceive of what it means to live on the spirit on the physical plane. And in a way, you don't have to worry about what anybody else is doing. You just begin to get your house in order by recognizing your own link to or interrelatedness with or your own spiritual source, which makes the meaning of each act different. We are no longer creatures of this earth only, but dwellers in the spiritual universe. We work with divine and everlasting law, carrying out the commands of infinite love. A great tenderness and gentleness dwells in our hearts, and we feel the sorrow and pain of every being, not of men and women only, but of those lesser lives who are also bound to us by close ties. Passing through sacrifice, we shall live in joy great and increasing, till it fills all life, the heaven and the earth alike. Power will be given us to carry out the things of our immortality, and the vesture of pain and the limits of the mortal will pass away like a curtain that is withdrawn, and we will know ourselves. Now, since the Brahman has not experienced their identity with the spiritual one or with that which lies behind their own personality and their own body, is caught in the trap because they say, well, I hear all you're saying, it all sounds awfully nice, but what am I going to do about it? Because it's all stuff, it's just words. For example, in the Indian culture, you study this, the lower kind of wisdom we talked about, the lower gyan. You study the whole process so you intellectually understand it, and then you start to lead a sattvic existence. You start to lead a pure existence by doing all of the acts in a ritualistic way of sacrifice, so that you see many, many Indians living their life according to Vedic prescription in very, very ritualistic, pure ways of sacrifice, even though the sacrifice isn't coming from their direct experience that makes the sacrifice a free act, and they're still doing it out of, I ought to do it. Right? It is my duty to do it. So that in the Hindu tradition, for example, the yajna or sacrifice, the Brahman is required to perform every day. There are offerings to the gods. There's Brahma yajna, the learning and spreading of ideas of the scriptural texts. Like, you've got to do this every day. Pitri yajna, offering oblations to the dead ancestors, water and rice. Nri yajna, worship of guests or the needy. Visiting us with us is K.K. Sa. And when I visit K.K.'s home in Nainital, in India, when I walk into that house, I am treated as God. Anybody that walks into that house is treated the same way. It is part of this process of spiritualizing life that every guest in your home is God, and you honor it. It is God. It's like Elijah in the Jewish religion. It's the unexpected guest that's come, and they come and they worship you. They put the tilak on your forehead, and they bring you gifts. They seat you in a special place. You are the guest. Just because you could have been the gas meter man, right? It's a whole other way of looking at who dropped by. Bhuta yajna, the feeding of dumb animals and birds. Now, in many Brahmins' minds, they are doing this to atone for a number of unconscious karmic things they might have done with the broomstick, the water pot, the grinding stone, the oven, or the mortar and pestle. That is, just in daily life, they've been creating all this stuff. And this is a way of cleaning it away. It's just a way of working out karma all the time. But much more profound as a way of sacrifice that Krishna refers to is the sacrificing of oneself. which doesn't mean the taking of the sun and putting him on the block and burning him. It means that everything that you do, you begin to do in relation to this wisdom. And as your meditation gets deeper, this wisdom takes on flesh and blood because it starts to be a valid feeling of relatedness to something much greater than the game you thought you were playing. You thought you were saying, look, am I getting enough? And later you say, how soon can I become part of it? And it just makes the meaning of every act different. You get to feed your body in order to maintain the temple so that you can deepen your wisdom, so that you can increase your samadhi, so that you can get through your ego, so that you can come to Brahman. Far out. And that includes a pizza. I mean, it's all of it. Everything you eat becomes that. The self-sacrifice, the giving of something without expecting anything in return. It's far out. Just offering of it, just doing it. You do it because it's doing. Like, I do these because I do these, because I do these, because this is what I do. Because this is it, this is the offering. When somebody comes up and says, thank you, that's very nice. But that isn't exactly what it's about. It's a level of it. It's a very pleasant ego level. It's sort of poignantly sweet. But the fact is that you, by being here, and me by being here, we are doing this offering together. It isn't anybody doing it any more than anybody else, so who's thanking whom? This is the sacrifice right here. Now, those of you that get uptight about the word God or the idea that Krishna is lying behind nirvana, you can say, look, all I'm realizing is, just as when I sit down to meditate, the goal is to realize nirvana, so I will sacrifice everything into the void. I'll just keep pouring my life into the void. Okay? Into the fullness of the void. Don't narrow void too narrowly. When you get there, it'll be time enough to realize that the Brahman was merely this huge mouth into which you were pouring the sacrifices for Krishna. There is a mantra I used to work with, an English mantra, where you focused on your ajna, your sixth chakra, and you would say, I am a point of sacrificial fire held within the fiery will of God. I am a point of sacrificial fire held within the fiery will of God. And if you did that long enough, you became like a burning fire of sacrifice. It's a power mantra. It's a mantra that makes you part of the sacrificial fire. And everything you're doing, you're converting. You're just converting. All your desires, all your perceptions, everything is a conversion. First, you sacrifice thinking of yourself as the doer. How did you do that? By realizing that it was all determined, it's all karmic runoff, it's all lawful. So the minute you understood that, the sacrifice is complete. The minute you remember that, you don't get busy thinking you're doing anything. What's left is the enjoyer, the knower, the witness, the delighter, the collector, the experiencer. And that's the next one you sacrifice. And you sacrifice that into the realization that the big W witness, the big E enjoyer, comes through that merging. That's the Atman in you. That's the real bliss. That's the real place of enjoyment. So you sacrifice enjoyment into the enjoyer. And in Ouspensky's book of Gurdjieff, there's one that you might remember. It's very useful. It says, another thing that people must sacrifice is their suffering. No one who has not sacrificed his suffering can work. Nothing can be attained without suffering. But at the same time, one must begin by sacrificing suffering. And you will begin to understand when that flip occurs inside yourself, when you begin to see your suffering as grace. You don't have to get as far out as the monk in the rowboat standing in the lake saying, God, God, give me more pain. You don't have to do a masochistic trip. But you get to the point where when you're suffering, the suffering is the fire of purification. You're saying, yeah, right, boy, isn't this hell? Am I suffering? Okay. But there is a lightness that has entered into the suffering at that point. Because you can't sit around with self-pity and do much sadhana. Okay. Oh, it's so hard. I'm in this temple and the mosquitoes are so bad. And I'm suffering. Like Swami Rama, I told you that about being at the temple and being thrown out of the temple, and he had to spend the night by the side of the river where all the mosquitoes kept biting him, and he kept saying to Ram, oh, thank you, Ram, for bringing the mosquitoes to keep me awake so I could think of you. You have to sacrifice your fascination with it all. Okay? As long as you're still collecting experiences, the sacrifice is short. You're still saying, well, I'll give you some. I'll throw a little ghee into the fire because it's going to be a ball for me. Okay? I mean, if we have this all-night thing, will we have fun? Okay? I mean, have I enjoyed Naropa? Okay? That's a good one. People say, well, I'm really not enjoying this very much. And I often say, good. You know? Or you sometimes, gee, that's terrible. Why don't you try to get your money back? Because that experiencer, enjoyer, that one has to be examined too. That goes. It doesn't mean that you don't enjoy it, but you're not attached to being the enjoyer. The bizarre thing is the more you sacrifice, the more you come into the spirit, the more you get it all, the more you're having it all every moment. So if you think of that Brahman state we've been talking about as the huge mouth of the sacrifice, it's the gateway. It's the gateway, and you just pour your life into the Brahman. Just keep pouring your life into the Brahman. Pouring your life into the Brahman. And you keep forgetting and thinking you're in it for yourself. I'm going to get enlightened. And then you remember, keeping in mind the concept of sacrifice. At that point, then karma yoga takes on a whole other meaning. Because every act is an offering. You're offering. And it's really weird when you get down to your really sneaky act. Like the next time you're doing a sneaky act. Like I was learning from Haridas Baba, I was learning mantras for the nice things. Like you learn a mantra for taking a shower. You learn a mantra for going to the toilet, for each type of going to the toilet. See? You learn mantras for everything to keep reminding you what it's about, reminding you what the game is about. See? But how about when you've just bad-mouthed somebody? You know, you're sitting around gossiping and you think, this is an offering to God, far out. Right? It's an offering. See? It's possible, but just keep working with it. Realize, keep looking at it, doing that take of far out. Think of this. This is an offering. Look what I offered God today. Gossip. You know, greed, lust, you know. It's great. I mean, don't worry. You know, the Brahman can incorporate it all. You know, there's no problem. Now we turn to just a brief discussion of mantra. Let me read you this story that Swami Muktananda tells, because it's about the use of mantra. Once a saint was giving a discourse using the verse about mantra as his theme. There was a man in the audience who rose and he began to speak in a most impertinent tone to the master. He said, look, you have been singing the glories of doing mantra, but that doesn't make any sense to me. What can you possibly gain by just repeating the same words over and over until you get completely bored with it? If you were to keep repeating the word bread, 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 would that fill your stomach? The saint was plunged into thought. How should he answer that man? Suddenly he shouted at the man, you ass, sit down. Okay? The moment this term struck his eardrums, the man felt that he had been insulted in a most vile fashion. He grew red in the face. He began to shake violently with rage. His suit and his tie and his head were all shaking. It appeared as though his clothes would fly off in different directions. Now the saint stood there with folded hands saying, oh, sir, most kind sir, please, sir, cool off. What has happened? Why are you so uptight? The man answered back, you pretend to be a holy man? You use the foulest term of abuse for me, and still you have the cheek to ask me what has happened as though you were completely innocent? The saint asked, for God's sake, for my sake, be calm. And at least listen to me. Maybe I've made a mistake, but do tell me what has happened. Again the man began to tremble, and he said, as if you didn't know what has happened. Didn't you call me an ass? Look, said the saint, I called you an ass just once, and see the marvelous effect it has had upon you. It made you shake with rage for these hours. It's disturbed your peace and clouded your reason and rendered you totally incapable of thinking sensibly. What makes you think that we who repeat these words of the Lord for hours on end won't get any benefit from it? Okay? There are a number of levels of use of mantra. First of all, and quite obviously to you, it has to do with vibration. The subtle vibrations of the sounds of mantra and the repetition of these play a very important role. It's as if there are planes of reality, relative reality, which have their own sound. And what you do mantra for is to tune yourself to these sounds by tuning your own vibration through the repetition of the mantra into the sound. And the use of sound, which is called Shabd Yoga, or working with inner sounds or sound, has been known in Egypt and Greece and in India by the Sufis. And all of the holy books have suggested the relation of sound to the creation of all form. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God, and the Word was made flesh. And so if you see through the causal plane into idea which is already subtle sound and into more and more gross sound, and that your body is in effect a form of gross vibration, which is a sound. It has a sound, though you may not be able to hear it. And that as you purify your own consciousness, as you purify yourself through extricating yourself from grosser and grosser vibrational planes, you are re-entering back into the formless. So you're going from the one into the many and the many back into the one. So the Word becomes the vehicle for going back inward. But it's not mechanical vibration alone. The power and the effect of a mantra depend on the spiritual attitude, the knowledge and the responsiveness of the individual. You can sit in this room and say, well, I'm going to try this thing, but the damn thing isn't going to work. It's just nonsense. It's medicine man stuff. And I guarantee it probably won't work. I won't guarantee probably. I either guarantee or I say probably. It probably won't work. It may work in spite of you. It's like the other day, a man came up to me at this lecture, and he looked a little blown out. And he said, he said, thank you so much. He said, I'm just about to return home. He said, I was in Boulder, and my wife heard you were here, and she conned me into coming. I came here in spite of, I didn't want to come here. I wanted to go horseback riding. But I came here, I'm in the legislature. He was a man in his middle 30s. But I came here, and he said, everything you said hit me in a certain way. Well, then, that was about 2 weeks ago, and I got a letter from him last week saying, I don't know what to do. My whole life's changing. And today, this morning, his wife called me saying that she doesn't know what to do about her husband. She says he's moved to the office now because he wants to pace all the time, because every time he goes to sleep, the masters are instructing him. And all he's feeling is heat from the top of his head down to his genitals. This incredible heat, in other words, Shakti. And he thinks he's going insane. And he wonders if he can fly out and come back, because he doesn't know what to do. He can't go to the legislature this way. Right? Right? So it has to do with the readiness in a karmic sense of an individual to be able to work with stuff. He was ready in spite of himself. Right? It wasn't his spiritual attitude so much as just his ripeness, if you will. But the shabda we're talking about, the sound, is not basically a physical, but rather a spiritual sound. Just as the chakras are not basically physical things. You can't do an operation, a surgical operation on chakras. They are spiritual loci in the body, focuses of various kinds of energy in the body. A mantra is only initially heard by the ears. Then it is heard by the heart. It is initially uttered by the mouth. Later, it is uttered by the mind. Mantras themselves don't do anything. It all has to do with the beings that work with them. So that power mantras are only unless you are the kind of person who has the one-pointedness of mind and the particular characteristics that make those power mantras work. They're not spells by themselves, but they can be used that way. But anything can be used for anything when you have a developed, evolved consciousness. That is, what the mantra does is it concentrates already existing stuff in you. It just brings it into a focus. It's like a magnifying glass with the sun. The magnifying glass doesn't have any heat in and of itself, but it takes the sunlight and it focuses and it makes it one-pointed. So the mantra becomes like a laser beam for you. If you think of the mind as an ocean with waves of thought on it and waves going in all directions from cross currents of wind, it sets up one thought that goes over and over again, and you use that one thought in order to dislodge your attachment to all the other thoughts. So that pretty soon all the other thoughts are just like birds floating by, and this one thought is going. So that when I'm driving along, I'm just doing Ram, 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 Ram. And there's a billboard coming by, and that gets chomped into Ram, 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 Ram. And I look down at the speedometer, and that becomes Ram, 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 Ram. And I'm thinking, gee, I'll get a milkshake at the next restaurant, Ram, 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 Ram. And it's all coming and going and coming and going, and it's all being converted. Mantra is esoteric. It's like profound wisdom. It does not disclose itself at first glance. It's not a surface thing. It goes into the depths of one's mind. It's used the same way meditation is. You will start with an alien set of sounds. Then you'll get familiar with the sounds. Then as you get familiar with them, start to surrender into them, start to merge into them, start to offer all of your other thoughts as sacrifice into them. When you're doing the mantra and the thought comes up, I don't think this is going to work. Take that as a thought and offer it on a golden tray with a silk handkerchief and incense and a candle, and offer it to the mantra. And just keep doing the mantra. Just keep offering it in. Offer all your doubts. Offer your discomforts. Offer your boredom. Offer your sore throat. Offer. Keep offering. There are different types of mantras. There are power mantras. There are seed mantras, mantras that activate each chakra in your body. Once the mantra gets into you, those of you that have ever seen a book called Way of the Pilgrim, which is about a very simple Russian peasant monk who starts to recite a mantra. And as he goes on doing this mantra, he's doing the Jesus prayer, by the way. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me. He says, I do not feel, and he's walking through the bitter cold Russian winter. He says, I don't feel that I'm walking at all. I am only aware of the fact that I'm saying the prayer. When the bitter cold pierces me, I begin to say my prayer more earnestly, and I quickly get warm all over. When hunger begins to overcome me, I call more often on the prayer, and I forget my wish for food. I have become a sort of half-conscious person. I have no cares and no interests. The fussy business of the world I would not give a glance to. The one thing I wish for is to be alone, all by myself to pray without ceasing, and doing this I am filled with joy. Another quote from him, after no great lapse of time, I had the feeling that the prayer had, so to speak, by its own action passed from my lips to my heart. Further, there came into my heart a gracious warmth. None of these things made me feel at all cast down. It was though they happened to someone else, and I merely watched them. The prayer brought sweetness into my heart and made me unaware, so to speak, of everything else. If the enemy cannot turn us from prayer by means of vain and sinful thoughts, then he brings back into our minds good things we have been taught and fills us with beautiful ideas. So he said, it's taught me, therefore, not to admit even the most lofty of spiritual thoughts. Everywhere you find yourself, you set up an altar to God in your mind by means of prayer. And finally, just a moment, the stages of mantra. First, you will do the mantra with your mouth. It's on the tongue. That's in your gross body. You're going to do this mantra. After some time, the mantra will start to be in your throat. You still may be doing it aloud, but you'll start to feel it in your throat. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this year. Who knows? Depends on how ready you are, how wide open you are for the mantra. Now you're doing the mantra in the subtle body, or the dream body as it's sometimes called. And when the mantra starts to enter your throat, you will notice changes in your life from the mantra. You'll notice that your sleep becomes more blissful. You'll start to have visions of gods and saints and siddhas and goddesses, and you'll start to experience tremendous happiness within your heart. You'll start to feel lightness in your body. These are all qualities that are connected with different stages of use of mantra. After it's been in your throat for a while, you'll start to experience the mantra in your heart. This is now moving towards the causal body. You'll start to feel new love, new enthusiasm. There'll be a new luster in your body. It starts to affect your skin, everything about you. You're more detached but more proficient. Then finally you'll start to experience it in your navel region. And you'll start to experience great contentment and start to have more wisdom and more visions. And at a certain point, japa, or this repetition, becomes ajapa japa, meaning it's automatic. And at that point, as Kabir says, Ram practices my japa while I sit relaxed. At that point, the mantra's doing you, you're not doing the mantra anymore. And it's a far-out moment when you start to notice that happening.